see the esophagus running behind the heart through the thoracic cavity. And then the esophagus, like the aorta and inferior vena cava, as well as the vagus nerve, goes through the diaphragm. So the esophagus goes through the diaphragm, and then you see about a ½ inch of the esophagus in the abdominal cavity, where it then joins the cardia region of the stomach. So some of the structures you can see just on the surface without disarticulating or pulling anything out would be the liver. And under the right lobe of the liver, you just see a little bit of the green colored gallbladder. And then this would be the stomach right here, and the intestine. Of course, the intestine has a small intestine with a smaller diameter tube, and then the large intestine with a larger diameter tube. And all parts of the large intestine are easy to identify because they're gray in color. So we can see the cecum, ascending colon, transverse colon, and descending colon. And then everything here would be part of the small intestine. So those are things you can see from the surface. If we want to see more detail, we kind of have to start pulling it apart. So let's do that. So I'm going to pull the liver out, and let's take a look at the liver. So behind the liver would be the inferior vena cava and the hepatic vein, draining blood out of the liver into the inferior vena cava. So I'm going to flip it over to the front. And now what I'm going to do is look at some of the structures across the bottom of the liver. And to do that, I'm going to flip it up. And when I flip it up, you can see the gallbladder. It's a bag-like structure. And the duct going directly into the gallbladder at my fingertip is the cystic duct. So there are two ducts at my fingertip coming out of the liver, and they would be right and left hepatic ducts, and they join to form the common hepatic duct, which is only about 1/16 of an inch long, that then splits to become the cystic duct. And finally, the last one down here at my fingertip, which would be the common bile duct. And the common bile duct ultimately joins with the main pancreatic duct coming out of the pancreas to form the hepatopancreatic ampulla that opens into the duodenum of the small intestine. So I'm going to put this down and move on to the stomach. So you can see where the esophagus is coming through the diaphragm, and here's where the esophagus joins the cardia region of the stomach, which is the region of the stomach closest to the heart. And I'm going to pull the stomach out. And when I pull the stomach out, you'll notice the orange colored, or at least orange on most models, pancreas, which is behind the stomach. So as soon as I pull the stomach out, we're able to see the pancreas behind it. So here's my stomach. And the smaller diameter tube is the esophagus. The larger diameter is where the stomach ends and the duodenum of the small intestine begins. So the esophagus attaches to the cardia region of the stomach, and there's three other regions: the fundus, this hump on the side, the body beneath my fingers, and what's left is the pylorus region. So cardia, fundus, body, pylorus. The smooth muscle cells within the muscularis layer of the esophagus, where it attaches to the cardia of the stomach, form a sphincter muscle called the gastroesophageal sphincter. And then the smooth muscle cells in the muscularis of the pylorus region form a sphincter muscle called the pyloric sphincter. There's a lesser curvature across the top and a greater curvature across the bottom. And when I split it open, I get the rugae. Okay? All right. So I'm going to put the stomach down. And you can see right here is where the stomach ends, and that's where the duodenum begins. So let's pull this out, because you honestly have to pull it out to be able to see the rest of these structures, at least in their entirety. So I'm going to pull this out, And when I do, I see the, whoops. So, stomach was here, and that's where the duodenum begins. And if I hold my finger where the duodenum begins and then flip it around, I can trace the rest of the duodenum across the back. So the duodenum goes across the back. The duodenum begins here, goes across the back, and then goes back to the front, and we see where the duodenum ends right here at my fingertip. And that's where the jejunal-ileum portion of the small intestine begins. So with the small intestine, we have the duodenum and then the jejunal-ileum. And the jejunal-ileum is going to, so I flip this around, it's going to, here's where the ileum portion is, and this is the last segment of the ileum portion of the jejunal-ileum. And this is where the ileum of the small intestine joins the cecum of the large intestine. So coming off the cecum of the large intestine, and you got to flip it around to see, is the appendix, a worm-like structure or finger-like structure coming off the cecum. So we've got the cecum and the appendix, and then the cecum becomes the colon. And there's 4 sections to the colon. You have the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and then the descending colon to about right here. The descending colon then forms a loop where the colon goes down and comes back up. And the portion of the colon that goes down and comes back up is the sigmoid colon. Now the sigmoid colon ends right here. And that's where the rectum begins. And the rectum is something that you see here behind the reproductive organ inset. I mentioned the mesentery as a system of membranes that binds the intestine together, and this would be the mesentery here. It's also very vascular. A lot of blood vessels are supported within it. So before we look at the rectum, let me just mention the pancreas. And there are 2 ducts coming out of the pancreas. The one on the bottom is the main pancreatic duct, and the one up top is the accessory pancreatic duct. So the one on bottom is the main, above is the accessory. And it's the main pancreatic duct that joins with the common bile duct to form the hepatopancreatic ampulla that opens into the duodenum of the small intestine. So in order to see the rectum, we got to pull this out. And when we pull this out, the structure right here, colored gray, is the rectum, where feces accumulates and compacts across a day. And then to see the anal canal, which is also part of the large intestine, you pull it out like this, and you see a little constricted region here. That's about a 1/2 inch long. That's the anal canal that opens as a hole, not a physical structure, but a hole called the anus. We good? I think that's it.